Welcome to GMF Talk. I'm Priya Mohan, and together with my team, we have prepared another insightful episode of our series, this time looking at the power of newsletters. We are especially focusing today on how news organizations can use newsletters to get curated content to their audiences. To discuss this, I'm being joined by Sham Jaff. She's a German journalist and podcaster, as well as the founder of What Happened Last Week. A very warm welcome to the program.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Sham, for joining us. So tell us about your newsletter. It is a newsletter, and what I want to know is what your subscribers get to read every week.
Yes, it is a newsletter. It's about, basically, I tried to talk about everything that mass media in Western media kind of doesn't talk about every week, which is I try to focus on bringing to the foreground stories, perspectives, just basically news from Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and try to, in a way, to give voice to different actors and incidents that we normally don't really look at in Western media, and try to break up a little bit of a Western bias that we might have in reading the news.
Okay, I'm really curious about this format about newsletters like yours, because if something happens in the world right now, I'll get about a dozen push notifications on my phone telling me, okay, there's some breaking news. So bearing this in mind, why do you think it's important for your readers to read about an event a week later?
I think we're all bombarded with the information, and specifically with the news. I think during the corona pandemic specifically, we've noticed how much more information we are taking in. And with the format of a newsletter, and specifically with the format that I've chosen to talk about things that have happened in the past week, I wanted to give my audience the opportunity to slow down a little bit in consuming the news, in understanding what's been happening.
You talked about the need for users and readers to slow down a bit. But in the news media, especially because of digitization, everyone wants to be fast and be the first person to get the news out there. So do you think that the newsletters are a format that other news and media organizations need to embrace as well?
I think newsletters can be a format for more depth, for more context, for because I mean, if you take a look at our phone, specifically people who have activated their notifications from news apps, they get their breaking news there, which is all good, fine. I wouldn't recommend that you put those notifications on, but as a newsreader myself, I'm much more interested in understanding the context, the depth of a news story, so that I understand what kind of an influence does it have on, let's say, global events or people's attitudes towards something, or basically our common knowledge about a place or about a topic. And I think media outlets could use newsletters for different purposes, and for specifically the purpose of bringing much more context, much more depth to a story, for personalizing perhaps the reporting on specific topics. For example, media outlets could use newsletters to build a connection with their readers, and to try and explain how this news report came about. Why is the attention on this region? To try and see if people have questions, if people could, if newsletters could become a way to engage much more thoroughly and much more personally with the reader.
Right. So you've talked about a number of advantages that not only the readers might enjoy, but also the news outlets themselves. Now, I already mentioned earlier that you're also a podcaster, and podcasts have become a format that I'm seeing everywhere. Even the tiniest of newspapers have started podcasts because everyone else is doing that. But newsletters, not so much. And I know that lots of people, just like myself, unsubscribe immediately whenever I see that I'm added to a newsletter or a mailing list. Despite this, do you still think that there is a future for newsletters in journalism?
There is a future for formats in general that bring context, that slow people down in the way that they move around the world, consume the news. I think there is a future for that, because what we're facing at the moment as readers and also as producers of news, not just consumers of news. What we're facing is an immense load of information and data coming at us. So there is always going to be a need for more curation, for much more context, for more understanding, because information doesn't really equal knowledge at the same time. So there's always going to be a need for someone to break that down, to take their time, to really invest much more into trying to convey what has happened. Sorry. And so for newsletters, I mean, it's just a format question. It could change into something completely else. It depends on the technology that we have. It depends on what people are really comfortable with. It's a format question is, I think, step number 3. It's not as important. I think the much more important question is, where are people spending their time the most? Where do we reach them? Where do they like to be consuming the news? And what is a format? What does the format allow us in terms of how can we tell the story in a correct way? How can we convey something, the importance of something? And those are the questions that I'm much more interested in answering, to be honest. But the format, it's just a format.
All right, let's talk about media bias next. In your newsletter, you focus on regions like Africa, Asia, South America. These regions don't usually get as much attention as the West in Western media. So where do you identify other blind spots that we who are working in the Western media maybe have?
So I specifically chose Latin America, Asia, and Africa because I do not see those regions and those continents and those perspectives represented in the way we talk about the world in the West. And I think the mass media, especially the news media, has an incredibly huge role in society when it comes to establishing and disseminating common cultural references, or they have an influence on people's attitudes towards certain regions, certain continents, and I think there is an active democratic role of the mass news media in society that we can perhaps will strengthen a little bit more and turn towards a little bit more. I feel like a lot of people grow up in school, in university, or when they start their first jobs in our working lives. I feel like we don't necessarily engage with those regions as much. We don't necessarily engage with the perspectives of those people who live in those regions. And we don't necessarily understand the bigger picture, the bigger global picture about certain events that are happening. And that sometimes, well, it strengthens a racist discourse. If the media doesn't fight against this unintentional, sometimes maybe unintentional result of focusing on specific countries and specific continents rather than on the global picture. And I think mass media reporting is especially sensitive when it comes to ethnic, cultural, and religious relations in whichever society we live in. And so trying to basically fill in the blind spots or fill in the gaps of reporting. That is what I try to do in my own reporting. Sometimes it's about a religious group in the Middle East, in the so-called Middle East that we haven't talked about. Sometimes it's about a topic that we in the West are talking about a lot, but we don't really know what kind of an impact our practices have on, let's say people in Latin America, or how do people in Asia think about the specific topic. So I try to bring a little bit of a global perspective on topics that are of global relevance.
Sham Jaff, thank you very much. Thank you for being our guest today on GMF Talk. And if you're interested in knowing what the newsletter is all about and interested in the content that Sham curates every week, then go subscribe What Happened Last Week. And of course, if you've not subscribed to the DW Global Media Forum, please make sure that you do that right now as well. I'm Priya Mohan, and thank you very much for watching. Until next time.